about 4 years old, my mom got involved with a religious group that mixed Eastern Indian and Native American beliefs and traditions. It was run by an old white guy who had spent much of his young adult life in India and his later years with a Hopi tribe here in the United States. By the time I was 10 years old, we had all moved from Los Angeles to a commune in rural Arizona with this group, and we stayed there until I started high school. My first few years of comic books were from India, and they were about blue-skinned Indian gods like Rama and Krishna and characters like Arjuna the Archer. I used to run around a nearby lake pretending that I was Arjuna the Archer, and I have to believe I'm one of a tiny handful of North American boys who can make that claim. It is not coincidence that I got married on Diwali. Where my Catholic relatives had figurines and paintings of saints in their homes, we had Kachina dolls, and which I would describe as representing spirit people of the Hopi and other Pueblo Native Americans. And on our walls we had sand paintings, which is in the top left corner, which are actually made of sand. And they were made on a nearby Navajo reservation. Interesting side note, my Spanish-speaking Latina mother was powerfully drawn to Native American culture, and that was a large part of the attraction of our belonging to this commune for so many years. A few years ago, my older brother and I got DNA testing, and we're 20% Native American through our mother, which I think means she was 40%, but she never knew it. Today, I self-identify as a Unitarian Universalist, but having grown up in an impoverished Spanish-speaking Latino family, and being involved with that commune for so many years makes me an atypical Unitarian Universalist. The Day of the Dead, or the Dia de los Muertos celebration, was heavily featured in the Disney animated film Coco, which was about a little boy who goes to the land of the dead in search of his great-great-grandfather. When my UU Church's movie group watched that movie, I told everyone in the discussion afterward, you know, that movie's pretty much my actual view of life and death. And nobody said anything to that. And I'm sure some people were thinking, well, is he serious? And I was in fact serious. Sometimes I pray, but I don't believe in God in the traditional Western sense of an all-powerful being with a gender. I pray, for lack of a better word, to my deceased loved ones. And I expect a response in the same way that I would expect somebody here would help me if I said, I have something heavy to carry out to my car after the service. I also sing to my deceased loved ones, and I've done that since I was a little boy. No one ever taught me to do that. It's just something that has always felt right. Sometimes when I've sung for church services, UU church services, I've been singing to them just as much as I was singing to everyone in the service. Talking to, singing to, communicating with people in spirit is what I want to talk about today. Under the broad umbrella of the label parapsychology, there is a category commonly referred to as mediumship. A psychic medium is someone who passes on messages from people in spirit after they have died. My first ever interaction with a psychic medium was at a party many years ago. There was a woman wearing an expensive-looking gypsy costume. She spoke in a terrible fake Irish accent. And I assume she noticed the ring on my finger and my then very smooth, youthful face, because she proceeded to tell me all about my wonderful wife and the two beautiful children we were going to have someday. If you don't already know, I'm very happily married to a man, and we do not now, and we will never have children, unless we accidentally sign a bunch of adoption paperwork. Flash forward to early last year. An acquaintance of mine introduced me to a friend of hers named Anna, saying, Anna's psychic. Actually, she's a medium. You know what that is, right? Like an arrow hitting a target, my mind went right back to that fake Irish gypsy woman from so many years ago. But I like to think of myself as both open-minded and polite, so I said, yes, I know what that is. And Anna the medium, who is now a friend of mine, said, I'm actually getting someone for you. Do you want to know? I said, sure, knock yourself out. She said, it's a woman. I can't tell if this is mother or grandmother, but this woman loves you. And I want to say Lily or Lillian. Do you know who that could be? I said, well, my grandma's name was Lillian. We were extremely close, and that's not at all a common name. Good for you. She said, well, I know it is a really common name, but was John your grandfather? I said, yes, he was. She said, they're both deceased. I said, yes. And then she went like this, and she said, did they divorce? I laughed and I said, no, they would never divorce. And she said, well, I'll just tell you, I'm getting them both really clearly as your grandparents, but I'm also clearly getting them as not together. I said, that's because Lillian was my dad's mom, and John was my mom's dad. So they were both my grandparents, but they were never a couple. She said, oh, I shouldn't assume divorce. I am not exaggerating in any way how I met my friend Anna last year. That's exactly what she said. In becoming friends with Anna, I have met other people who are trying to develop their mediumship skills. So I've offered myself up as a guinea pig because I consider myself to be open-minded, but I'll also tell you, frankly, but politely, if what you're saying to me doesn't make any sense. Case in point, one of these psychics in training, I guess you'd call them, that was practicing on me, she said, I have a woman with me. It's not mom, but she's mom's generation, so I want to say like an aunt. This was a traditional stay-at-home mom. She had 4 kids, and I'm getting those 4 kids as 3 and 1, so like 3 girls and a boy, or 3 close in age and 1 not. And she took care of you sometimes when you were a little boy. This is a very loving person. I want to say aunt, or like an aunt. I said, I'm sorry, but that does not describe anyone that I know now, or that I have ever known. She paused and she said, well, would it help if I said that the month of May is somehow connected to all this? Oh, or maybe it's the name May. And I said, oh my God, May was a neighbor we had when I was 8 years old. She did have 3 girls and 1 boy. She was a traditional stay-at-home mom. She did babysit me sometimes when I was little, and she was a very loving, wonderful person, but I hadn't thought about her in a really long time. I guess I kind of forgot. I'm sorry. Okay. I know that most of what I've said so far is a lot for some of you to swallow. And I want you to know that it all puts me in a very awkward position. I have worked for one of the world's top science institutions for more than a decade. and we work really closely with NASA, where we all deal in facts. So I got to see the Mars rover before it was sent up. It was behind a wall of glass, but it was like 20 feet away, and now it's on another planet. It was one of the coolest and geekiest moments of my life. I also have a master's degree, and I had to put myself through school. And from my costly, time-consuming formal education, I know for a fact that brain scans can show us where memories are physically stored in the brain. So just how exactly could people in spirit be demonstrating anything like memories, much less personalities, without the benefit of a physical brain? My costly, time-consuming formal education is directly at odds with my repeated personal experiences. What got it under my skin all the last year was thinking about the mechanics of what it is these mediums are doing. How on earth is it possible to communicate from one personality to another without a physical brain? That does not make sense. Also, it's happening. So what do I do with that? The idea that I'm currently sitting with, and this does not originate with me, is that consciousness might be received by our bodies rather than physically housed inside of our bodies. I was first introduced to that idea several years ago, and I just thought it was ridiculous at that time. The assumption that I've taken for granted as fact for most of my life is that consciousness is housed inside the body, and specifically inside the brain. If you damage a limb badly enough or outright lose a limb, you're still you. But if you damage badly enough or outright lose your head, that's it. It's all over, right? Maybe not. There's also the question of memories. Brain scans can show us where and when memories form in the brain because new synapses physically grow inside the brain in response to new stimuli. But what if, instead of being housed in those locations, memories are instead processed in those locations as they are received from elsewhere? I'm now giving serious consideration to the idea that our memories and even our personalities might be received by our brains rather than physically housed inside of our brains. Similar to how sensory input from our bodies is received from the brain. The part of your brain, for example, that processes vision is in the back of your head. And if you sustain an injury to the back of the head that's bad enough, you can go blind, even though there's nothing at all wrong with your eyes because that processing center gets damaged. So maybe physical brain damage from either injury or disease inhibits the processing of memories received from elsewhere, rather than inhibiting the storage and retrieval of memories from those damaged brain locations. I don't know. As an adult, I believe in the continuation of consciousness after death because of numerous personal experiences that have happened over my entire lifetime. Some of the most significant of those surround my mother's passing. In the last few weeks of her life, my mom regularly saw her own deceased parents and some aunts and uncles who had passed before her. Her Catholic family dismissed all of that as hallucinations, but she only ever hallucinated deceased loved ones. She never saw strangers. She never saw things like talking plants or pink elephants or anything like that. And if you've ever been on medication or recreational drugs that cause hallucinations, you know that you don't get to choose what you hallucinate. That's not how that works. Also, I think it's really important for me to point out that these were not comforting experiences for my mom. All of these deceased loved ones that she was seeing were trying to get her to go with them. And she was not ready for that. They were annoying her and making her angry. When I was a little boy, this old couple named Lee and Louise used to babysit me sometimes, and they were so loving and wonderful that I miss them even today. As my mom was dying several years ago, I was driving home one day from the nursing home, and I got stuck in traffic. So instead of singing to Lee and Louise, I was talking to them out loud, pleading with them to help my mom transition out of this life. This is my form of prayer. And remember that I expect a response when I do this kind of thing with my deceased loved ones. So the next day I go back to the nursing home, and we're all sitting there talking. My brother asked my mom if she'd seen any more of her parents. And she says, no, but guess who came to see me last night? Lee and Louise, do you even remember them? I have not thought about them in years. We hadn't been discussing Lee and Louise. She just coincidentally came up with that the day after I had been praying to them. Well, my husband is completely supportive of me exploring this issue of mediumship in my own way and in my own time. Last year, 2019, was kind of challenging and lonely for me. Most people are very polarized around this subject. Almost all of the responses to it that I have witnessed or personally experienced are extreme responses. It's either not at all real, and I mean disdainfully not real, or it's real but it's evil, or it's an extreme positive response where people see a certain color car on the freeway and they think that's a dead loved one trying to send them a message. Most people seem to desperately need this idea of mediumship to either be not at all real or absolute factual truth. Personally, I'm just not willing to pretend or rationalize away that this is happening, though I am still baffled by how it could be happening. I will say that those who need for it to be true often seem to be wounded to some degree by the loss of a loved one. But also those who need for it not to be true also seem to be coming kind of from a wounded place. A kind of epiphany for me last year was about atheists. It turns out that for many atheists, they don't believe in an afterlife of any kind, and by extension, that includes not believing in God. I did not know that. I thought that atheists were only taking God out of the afterlife equation. But again, my upbringing was very different from most North Americans. I can tell you that I have always believed in an afterlife, but I don't know that I've ever believed in God. Those two things have never gone hand in hand for me. I've done some historic research on this topic, and mediumship is widely accepted in the United Kingdom. Spiritualist churches regularly hold mediumship demonstrations, and there are hundreds of spiritualist churches across the UK. They have laws there governing the fees people charge to do mediumship and how to get refunds. According to the Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography, I didn't know that was a thing until I started researching this, just before the American Civil War, spiritualists were roughly 10% of the US population, and Universalists were more likely to convert to spiritualism than Unitarians were. There was a lot of debate on this subject in our early communities. Both Universalism and Unitarianism reached an accommodation with spiritualism in the late 1800s. The terms of that accommodation were basically, believe in this if you must, but don't preach about it. Today, in the United States, it is a widely disdained subject, but the roots of that disdain are neither scientific or religious. In the early 1900s, most mediums were women, and what they were trying to do was to demonstrate the continuation of consciousness after death. What they indisputably did was to demonstrate that women could make a living without becoming teachers or wives. That got other women thinking about what might be possible in all kinds of ways. And religious centers and community centers that were open to hosting mediumship demonstrations also tended to be open to hosting suffragettes. And the idea of truly independent women rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Those feelings of contempt for just the idea of autonomous women were so closely linked with mediumship in those early days that the stain of derision and mockery persists even till today. I am uncomfortable broaching the subject of mediumship with people, and I'm a pretty strong-willed person who I don't think would ever be described as conflict avoidant. But I have caught myself avoiding this subject in conversations in exactly the same way that I used to avoid subjects that might cause people to even suspect that I'm gay. I have been a closet believer in mediumship. Being out as gay now, and for most of my life, and being married to a wonderful man, and coming to all that part of myself so much later in life than I think I needed to, being in the closet in any form is super uncomfortable for me. So consider me out again. I believe in mediumship. And I'm very much aware of the ease with which it can all be faked and how people can convince themselves that something is happening when it really is not. It is easy to take advantage of vulnerable people. I do get that. I think the reason so many of us are polarized on this subject is because we're talking about both death and also an afterlife of some kind. And it is the rare individual who does not carry some baggage on either or both of those topics. I want to finish today by telling you something, by promising you something, and by requesting something. What I can tell you from my own history and from my experiences as a minister's spouse is that I have sat through a lot of funerals and memorials. Regardless of religious beliefs or lack of them, regardless of all demographics, a significant number of people who know that they are at the end of their lives make references to going home. I'm sorry, I can't stay here with you anymore. I have to go home. You know that if I fly away home tonight that I still love you. I'm done here, I'm going home. Well, I get to go home now, so that's good, right? That word home comes up over and over again with the dying. What's so fascinating about that to me is that for me, home is wherever Jason is, wherever my husband is. When I hear the word home, I don't think of our house, I think of him. For a lot of people, that word home sparks images in our minds of people and relationships rather than of buildings. What I can promise you is that if I know you, and especially if I care about you, I will sing to you after you pass. One of these practice mediums that was practicing on me, she connected with a close friend of mine who had passed, and she said to me, you know, people talk to their dead loved ones all the time, like out loud talk to them when there's no one else around to hear, but do you sing to this guy, like out loud sing to him, because he's acknowledging that? I said, yes, I do that all the time. She said, well, that is a new one on me. Like I was the strange one in that conversation. My request as I close this today is that if you outlive me, that you play music for me or sing to me after I've passed, even if that's just turning up the radio during a song that you like and thinking about me. I don't know why this is so important, but it's something that I can feel in my gut that it matters, and it's something that I have done instinctively since I was a child. The Disney film Coco represented Dia de los Muertos as being a small window of time each year when the dearly departed are with us, and that's an accurate depiction of Dia de los Muertos, but I believe that people in spirit are always available to us. Like the day I got stuck in traffic and I was pleading with Lee and Louise to help my mom. As we sing the closing hymn today, I invite you to just consider the possibility that maybe consciousness continues after the death of a body. Maybe. Maybe it's possible to communicate with people after they have passed. Maybe. Maybe singing to someone because their life is over is not that different to singing to someone because the church service is over. Maybe it's not an end so much as it is a transition. Maybe. Thank you.
Please rise and bow your